On Friday, the 23rd of April, for our fifth Humanising work in the live series. We've been talking human leadership all week this week. We've had some great conversations about self-awareness, other awareness, self-management, and today we're talking about relationship management in terms of how can we manage our relationships as a human leader, and how can we help others do the same as a leader. Our impact as a leader can have amplified effect on others. So we're going to be talking about that today, and building on all the conversations we've had so far this week around human leadership. We know emotional intelligence is a great framework to use to build our leadership skills. But what's the best way now that we can we can develop our self-awareness? What's the best way now that we can actually become more aware of others and manage ourselves and our relationships? And so that's what we're talking about this week. And we're continuing our series over the next 2 weeks as well, at midday every day, to really speak to some of our expert practitioners who are working in this space, don't often get a chance to just talk about it because they're out there doing it, trying to capture some of those nuggets of insights and really great pieces of thinking that really impact how we operate in organizations, in teams, and just generally with everyone around us as human beings. So today I am joined by Richard Woods. So I'm really pleased that he's here to join the discussion today. We're going to be talking about, as I said, about relationship management, psychological safety, all kinds of cool things. But I'll just say a quick hello to Richard. How are you?
Hi, Alex. I'm really good, thank you. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Great. And it's lovely to have you here. Do you want to just give us a brief introduction to who you are?
Okay, sure. I'm Richard. Kind of done lots of stuff with psychology with my education, and spent the last, I don't know how many years, 7, 8, maybe plus years doing leadership training and development and figuring out the best ways to do the development, but also learning the new things that come out, reading books and finding and learning from different people and different practices. Very curious about what we cover today.
And not just here in the UK, Richard, you've been doing work in China as well, haven't you?
Yeah, spent a long time in China, over probably was 14 years, and then stuff around APAC, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, that kind of thing. So working with teams of very diverse teams, different nationalities, different cultures, which is I suppose adds an extra level to what could be going on. But there's so many commonalities on what people need in terms of leadership, and the challenges they face are very, very similar. Just how they deal with it is slightly different.
Yeah, and that's really, it's a nice place to start actually, Richard, because I found that a lot when I was working in international roles, as I am now. But when I'm thinking about internally an international role, you know, it was I was often quite nervous. I was like, oh, what's the cultural impact of this? But actually, when you're working on a human level, and that's so relevant to what we're talking about now, actually, what you tap into what's right, and you can feel this inner compass of what is right for people and humans, regardless of some of those cultural complexities. Obviously, there's a huge amount you need to take into consideration in the context, but actually I think on that level there's a lot that we can take that is easy to and is universal to humans, I think. Would you agree?
Definitely. And I think the way things are progressing, and these types of conversations they show that in the past probably we said this is the leadership model and you should do this and this, and try and kind of push a framework. And some people would say, for example, oh, that doesn't work in China. And I think we're pushing behaviors, not necessarily pushing awareness and a way of thinking. And then the behaviors come from the individual or the team or the individual culture and the corporate culture even. So it's how to kind of enlighten people about what they how they should be looking, and then how they apply it will be different according to the circumstances. It's really, really true. And the core being the human side. Can you tap into that, and then I think things flow from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to the conversation we were having at the beginning of the week with Grace, and also with Lindsay as well, around being authentic and finding what it is in your core that you can kind of connect to, exactly that, around your values and your beliefs, because actually that's where your behaviors come from. And if you're able to articulate, or you know yourself better, you're going to be much stronger and more confident in being able to articulate where you're coming from and use that to understand others and manage yourself and manage your relationships better. So it's all so lovely, interconnected, intricately. So what I wanted to explore in more depth with you today, Richard, was around that kind of relationship management aspect of emotional intelligence. You know, is the kind of like the latest thinking around how we can really manage and develop relationships as a leader for ourselves with our teams, so that we've got a great relationship, but also as a bit of an observer of the team dynamics. How can we help others? What can we create in terms of that safe environment for people to feel comfortable in their relationships?
I think one of the key things that probably latest thinking, but also the COVID situation going virtual has shown that it takes that time, just spending time with the people, just having conversations rather than discussions or planning meetings or one-on-ones. It's actually just having a conversation, which sounds really, really simple, but it's not the way people have done leadership in business for, I don't know, or ever, I think. So it's about that, and goes back to active listening and being aware of your own presence and tapping into individual needs rather than this is how I should do this as a blanket statement. And it's makes it very difficult because there's no answer. And I think the modern thinking is you have to figure it out as you go, try things and then experiment and see what works for person one and maybe it doesn't work for person two. But it's that connection, finding a way to connect with that person or those people. And I think that is the kind of the core for me is what people are talking about and trying out.
Yeah, and I love that. You know, it is that unknown, isn't it? Then that does make it difficult because you can't just define it and say, oh yes, do X, Y, Z. Actually, it's far more subconscious. And I've said this earlier on in the week as well. There's something about being human that almost we take for granted in our intuition and how we respond and how we act. But it's very interesting that we do so much of that in our external relationships to work. And yet it's almost like when we come into work, we kind of forget all the brilliant techniques that we have for developing relationships as a human being. I wonder why that is.
Well, I think there's that kind of, it's where like theatre comes up, doesn't it? That you have to, there's a certain expectation and you just fulfill the role as you perceive it or has been defined by the culture. If a leader has to be like this and really sit up straight, be kind of serious or authoritarian, and that's kind of probably very, very traditional. But a lot of that still exists, and people aren't trying to be like bad bosses or inconsiderate. They wouldn't get away with it at home or with their friends because they would be called out on it. And I think that's where the psychological safety comes in. With your friends and family, it exists. You can be good and bad and then get feedback instantly without asking for it. But at work, not so much, because there's other things at stake. The position, so you can lose a position in a family, but it's much more stable than in a workplace. And people probably feel that discomfort there with, can I say this? How can I say this? And that extra second of thought probably means you miss the opportunity to actually to make that statement or to just be authentic. It's like something holds people back.
Yes, absolutely. And we talk a lot about this this new buzzword, really, which has, you know, increased massively over the last couple of years, mainly due to the brilliant work of Amy Edmondson. But psychological safety has become a well-known term. And I guess I'm really pleased that it has, because that means people are talking about it and people care about it, and organizations are thinking about how people feel in the workplace. And, you know, can they speak out and say what they think? Can they, act how they believe they should without the fear of retribution? And that's so important, isn't it? Whereas, you know, in a family, as you say, you know, things are slightly different, aren't they? You know, we don't have all of that kind of consequences because the relationships are there and stable and set, you know, for life. So what is it about the work environment that we can work on as leaders to create that psychological safety in our relationships?
I think this one's actually quite challenging in a way to start off with. I remember at the start of the lockdown, so over a year ago, somebody was saying, well, so now we're going virtual. I need to start doing psychological safety stuff. And I was like, yeah, I didn't say it, but I felt a little bit, you might be a bit late. Now it's even harder, because you can't just say, hey, do you feel psychologically safe? Because if they don't, they'll just won't say anything. And if they do, then you probably would have already known. So it's, what can people do? I think it's holding a space in meetings and conversations and things that where you actually allow people, even if they don't choose to take it at the beginning, just that this is a space for openness, for sharing your ideas, and seeing if anything comes up. If something doesn't come up, maybe you have more work to do. Unlikely that everything is being done is absolutely perfect. So if nothing comes up, possibly it shows a weakness in the safety of the team. But I think starting with the space and then respecting the space, I think, would be the next thing. So don't jump on it as soon as someone says something. You have to let it fly over you, and that's a bit of self-control and self-management, isn't it? Just not to react, but just to really hold yourself back.
Yeah, I like that. Respecting the space. That's going to be my quote for the day, I think. But it is. It's so that's so powerful, because I think, we assume that actually, and I think younger generations coming into the workforce will assume that actually there should be, psychological safety there, and certainly I've experienced a whole variety of different types of situations, and I wonder, what we can do, as you said, as leaders, creating that space, respecting that space, and almost like role modeling it as well, and trying new things. But also I think there's this quite complex relationship with blame. So obviously, no one really wants a blame culture. That doesn't feel comfortable for people to try new things. They fear failure massively, so they don't try, and it doesn't create that innovation and creativity in teams. But there's also something about how you can't really handle people's perception. So in terms of, lots of managers have had training in how to handle difficult conversations and approach things positively and proactively. But there are going to come up situations where people do make mistakes. How do you approach that in a way that doesn't feel like blame, but doesn't feel like you're avoiding the situation? Exactly as you said, almost like there's that weird kind of situation for leaders that they operate in, because they have to manage their own relationships, but they're so often dragged into difficulties in relationships within the team. And whenever anyone explores anything, and this happens at school, when my kids fall out with their friends, they explore the situation. Who's to blame? Who started it? What was the cause? What was the thing that happened? And how can we find the nuggets of goodness in the story that help people feel comfortable, confident, okay coming out of a difficult situation, that actually, we've respected the space, and people have had the space to say what they think. That doesn't mean that everything's, tickety-boo. Things might have had a really quite a significant impact on the work, on the team. But we don't need to ignore them, is what I'm saying. We don't need to kind of not address those. It's about how you do it in that positive way. And that's so tough, isn't it, when people judge you differently?
It's a really good point. I think what came to my mind when you were speaking, I had no idea we would go this direction, but one thing I'm always pushing for, it might possibly too much, but it's things like retrospectives or reviews or something after a certain piece of work, or possibly an incident that happens that needs people to dissect it and see what happens. If you do that retrospective as a group and try and figure out what happened together to make maybe an action plan, put something in place that means it can't happen again, and look at what is it about how we work, the way we work together with this situation that caused this to be possible to happen.
Yeah.
Is it you lacking, and they just try to find the cause rather than the assigning blame. And if someone can then say, hey Alex, I completely screwed up here, but I need to figure out how and why, and then they can get involved in that process, and hopefully it becomes learning cycles of learning. But to get people to do that at the beginning is really, really tough to talk about, because people like to celebrate wins, But to celebrate failures and losses is not so easy, because it's not cool, right? It's not good to say, hey, we didn't work, this didn't work, but what can we learn from it?
Yeah, and I agree, and I think it's really interesting at what point you do the reflection. Because obviously when something's happened, you're in it, aren't you? And you feel it, and the emotion is there, and you're dealing with it as a leader, maybe just internally, even if you're portraying something different more positively, and actually allowing the space and the time for people to kind of overcome the emotional response and bounce back into a more positive state. Because so many of us do it, we'll have an immediate kind of positive, a negative response, and then we'll quite quickly think about, oh, well, actually, maybe it's not the end of the world, maybe it's not this. So the time between actually getting people together to reflect, and I love what you mentioned there, it's kind of like about what were the conditions that allowed this to happen, which is much less, exactly as you said, about blame. So I love that positioning. I think that's really strong. The other piece that I think that is really interesting dynamic here with psychological safety is bravery. It's that almost like there needs to be this balance of, a leader helping support the psychological safety for the team and the individuals to be, have great, strong relationships, but also the bravery of people to try something and have that growth mindset that it's not always going to be how it has been, that people I have been working with may have learned and grown and developed through the time I've been with them. Because we often see, people move on from roles because they feel they're held back by relationships where people view them and judge them as their old selves. And certainly with this returning to workplaces, that's happening everywhere, people might have evolved considerably since that time, especially through all the experiences that have really rapidly increased our own growth through the last year. How are we allowing people to be brave and try something new and almost like reinvent themselves? Actually, I've come through stronger. I'm completely more focused now on exactly what I care about and what's important to me in these relationships. Sorry, I've gone all over the place there, but just kind of ideas buzzing that are all interconnected.
And I think you're right with that word bravery. The leader as well, to probably ask those questions. And it is almost, if you get into the conversation about, okay, what happened in the last year, where do you want to go, what do you want to do, what challenges do you need, what support do you need, you might lose people who decide actually working here isn't the right fit. And that's quite sad, but it might, in terms of being human, that might be the way to be, and they might come back. And so I don't know, I feel it is that's quite a powerful conversation to have if people can be open about it and say, I want my job or my work to be like this. I'm not sort of talking about completely changing everything about what happens inside the company, but I felt like this was a really great way of me working. Can I do this now, even though we're going back to normal? And do we fall back into the old habits? And it is, so this is a big opportunity for people to take advantage of the fact that we've probably kind of forgotten the routines now. It's been so long, we've forgotten what we used to do in the office. So just start fresh, sit down and say, okay, what should we do to achieve what we're supposed to be achieving, and decide on those goals and who does what, and kind of, I don't know, make it a bit more collaborative even, because I think collaboration is the key to making people feel, if they feel involved, they feel ownership of what's going on, and that probably, I hope, feel more safe. And then the leader isn't bossing, but is like facilitating almost, and that hopefully would be a nicer dynamic in that team. Yeah,
absolutely. It's just, there's so much in that, isn't there? I'm just trying to unpack it all and thinking about kind of the extension as well, because we talked about this and we're rapidly moving through the time. So I want to get onto this point because we talked about it before and it does feel really important, which is around how can the leader extend this across the organization, so other teams and departments, because we know that leaders have such an interesting influence in organizations across their teams, how they role model things, and almost like more so now than ever before, we're really relying on those leaders to kind of hold us all together in lots of different ways. And if they're the ones that are, really the best at creating that psychological safety that makes a difference to people on a daily basis, how can we make sure that that extends? What are your thoughts on bringing others into it?
I think that's a really good a really good point for if the leader has a team and then wants to thinks this is working, then it's probably acknowledging some of the challenges they have had and the approaches that they've tried with their team or are trying, and seeing what the impact is with the people in the a similar position in other departments or other business units, and say, and that's quite that needs psychological safety as well on a different level, but it's quite also probably a little bit of vulnerability, but definitely authentic. Say, I struggled with this, I've tried this approach and it seemed to be working because my team now does XYZ and I feel we're getting good impact, and I have to do, I've got more time for this or I don't do that, and see whether the other people, just being a role model for the others, but not just a passive role model, say just kind of putting it out there, being the being marketing your own approach to internally. So this seems to be working with our people. Why don't you try it in your team? And then hopefully it filters across. But also, if you try something with a team of, say you got a team of 8 and they all have a team of below them as well, hopefully that it will just, nice things will be replicated and picked up, and because people see the benefit, or they just, if it feels better, I'll try that. I'll try what Jeff did because it seems to work on us, so I'll try it with my team, and this might be the way. So I think it's quite slow. You can't really push, because I think pushing is not quite the way to build that feeling, that environment of safety. And also it's hard to push leaders around, because if they're in that mindset, they'll feel under threat. So I think that's a little bit of it. Alex paused. Yeah, Alex dropped off. So I'll talk about another little bit. She'll come back in a second. I was in a meeting the other day, and there was one person that was talking about taking on a task with someone senior, and then a few people at the similar level. And this one particular person was saying, if I take on this, I want to ensure that I have the psychological safety, so I don't get blamed. To go back to what Alex was saying, and I thought this was an interesting way to bring up psychological safety, because to have that, to have psychological safety enough to be able to kind of openly state it, means it's at a high level. But also there's still the fear that when working in a different team, because this was a kind of a cross-regional team, whether that would upset that. In the small team, okay, but in a bigger team, not so much. It definitely is about modeling, but that person would be modeling it for the other people from other teams. So I feel like this is quite a challenging topic to get people in other teams to understand the value of what can be done. And you kind of want it to be coming through naturally, right? You want people to be feeling that if they speak to their colleagues, if they go to a training program or they have a cross-functional meeting, and if they can say, oh no, we don't need to do it like that, we can do it like this, or there's just some practice or approach or style, then they can be they can, if they own that process, then they can share it widely without any need for a formalized communication campaign or a project plan. Just hopefully it will naturally extend through people's enjoyment, people's positivity, and the fact that, I suppose, especially with psychological safety, if you feel like it's good, then it will take on a life of its own almost. I think, but the other thing here is also the leader, the senior leaders. Everyone has a leader, right? Everyone has a boss, and it's how can the particular leader of influence get that psychological safety and feeling of comfort in their position to be able to put it sideways, to put it down. And that is, I mean, this just gets reflected and repeated over and over and over through the whole organization, I think. So it's the same problem, but on different levels, with different levels of influence from that particular leader. So what else would I say on this? How can a leader extend this? Actually, I would also probably put out there that, if I mentioned retrospectives a little bit earlier, inside a team or a department, if you can have group learning, team knowledge sharing, and that type of thing across the organization, wouldn't be as regular. But if you can taking time, making the effort to say, this is what we learned in, for example, the IT department, and we want to share that with you because it's working, and the leader can share it, but also the teams can share it and say, this is something we could all try, and just having a platform for doing that, not just a document, but actually a kind of a place for people to share openly. And I think that would be a nice way to work. Welcome back, Alex.
I'm so sorry. Isn't that wonderful? So it's just to prove that we really are live, right? So I actually still have no clue what happened, just completely lost the screen. But thank you. So I'm presuming you've carried on because I've come straight back into the same discussion. So thank you so much for that, Richard. I'm sorry to have missed some of your insights.
You'll have to watch the recording.
I will. So we've got a couple of minutes left. In terms of wrapping up, we'll probably do a double act then. So I'll wrap up the beginning and then you can kind of just recap what we were saying. But yeah, we've explored how important it is to have that human level of like universally being able to make and create connections with others meaningfully, whether that be with individuals, whether that be across teams, but particularly as a leader, bringing in your abilities that you use outside of work into that environment, having just a conversation, as you said, like making it simple, but also making sure that we create space and respect that space. And we had I think a comment come through about sharing vulnerabilities to be able to co-create that psychological safety, because actually, yeah, as you say, it really is about partnering together on it. It's not about one person, right? Oh, you haven't created the psychological safety in the environment, so therefore I'm not going to, partake and be brave. And that was the other thing we talked about, having bravery to be able to try something new and not to assume that people are always the same or to judge them, but to be able to try new ways of building relationships and making better relationships, as well as avoiding blame. So we talked about how we could have conversations where we talk about the conditions that we've created together and the retrospective reviews of how we've done. And I know there was a great comment from Holly as well, sharing about how she really gets quite a lot from being able to do those retrospective kind of what are the learning we had from this situation, whether it's a good outcome or not. We should be doing that all the time, right? Because we can learn all the time. But Richard, I would love to hear what you were talking about as a recap in the last few minutes. I missed, I think, a whole 5 minutes trying to get back in.
Well, I'll try to sum it up briefly. I think it was the key theme there about extending it around the organization is about sharing, like leaders sharing to other leaders, to about, like I said, the vulnerabilities and what they're trying and what's the impact being to try and inspire the other leaders to try it. And then it's kind of probably doing the same thing down, role modeling and getting people to practice as it goes down inside that business unit or that as it goes lower down in the organization. And then I was kind of finishing off with having some kind of platform for sharing, experience sharing or knowledge sharing, where you can have the people themselves kind of promoting what they've done to other teams, say this has made our work better, this has made us more impactful, this has made us happier, and to share it with people across the whole organization. That could be something like this. Actually, you could have an organizational live chat or something, just where it's really authentic and people are sharing, and that would be a nice way to kind of spread.
That storytelling, piece is so strong, isn't it? And if you think about how much storytelling affects us as human beings, we tell our babies and our children stories to help them learn about the whole world around them, about relationships, challenges, with all kinds of brilliance, outcomes that help them experience things. And we watch as adults, certainly, I know most friends of mine are watching Netflix and other channels to be part of a story of what someone's going through. And it's that emotional tie into something that's really strong that brings us along. And I think that's why it's so important to bring storytelling into organizations and bring it to life for people, so that actually they can understand that that's the way we learn as humans, isn't it? Really listening to other people's experiences and not positioning people in doing so, but just sharing what's happened for me in something so so closely connected. So we've come to the end of 30 minutes very rapidly. I had a fierce 5 minutes trying to get back in. So thank you so much, Richard. You're a star. Keep going. That's it's just goes to show, doesn't it? Exactly that. It's live. So anything can happen, unscripted and unrehearsed, but you dealt with it really well. So thank you. I really appreciate your time talking today. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening and watching. We are streaming across YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook, and it's being downloaded into an audio file for our podcast, which is available on Spotify, which is Humanising Work with Bailey and French. So thank you to everyone who's been watching, and for anyone who's watching the recording and listening along. We hope you can join us again next week, every day, midday GMT, to talk about, we're going to move on to talking about teams next week, and what can we do in teams to humanise this world of work. So I'm really excited. We've got some fantastic people joining us, all expert practitioners, and I can't wait. So I hope you have a lovely weekend, Richard. Thank you so much for your time.
Speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot.